G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Jasmine, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the topic of head coverings and why I personally have chosen not to wear one. So let's get right into it. Now, this idea of wearing a head covering is mainly associated with the Mennonite and the Amish community. Now, once again, I'm not trying to have a go at them or anything like that. I'm basically just going to give you my view on why I personally don't wear a head covering based on the verses that they use, which is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And one of the first things we need to remember is that head coverings were symbolic, and in the New Testament, head coverings were symbolic to basically a wife's submission to her husband. So let's take a look at this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and I'm going to be reading verses 3 to 5, and it says, "But I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. Every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying shames his head, but every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying shames her head, for she is one and the same as the woman whose head is shaved." Now, the Greek word translated women can also be translated as wife, and you can actually see this in the ESV translation. And it seems that in this passage that the wearing of a head covering really is something that symbolizes a woman's submission to her husband, and also because the woman is the glory of man. Now let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 11 verses 8 to 10. And it says, "For man does not originate from a woman, but woman from man. For indeed man was not created for the woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake. Therefore the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels." Now, I'm going to talk about the angels in a minute, but really you can see that it's clear that this is a reference to basically Adam and Eve as husband and wife. And so this head covering symbolizes the fact that women ought to be in submission to their husbands. The next point I want to make is that women don't have to wear head coverings all the time. Okay, so women do not have to wear head coverings all the time. Now, Paul doesn't instruct women to wear head coverings, 24/7 or, 8 hours a day. He only instructs women to wear the head coverings when they are praying or when they prophesy. So let's take a look, 1 Corinthians 11 verses 4 to 5. "Every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying shames his head, but every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying shames her head, for she is one and the same as the woman whose head is shaved." So notice that this instruction only applies to women when they are praying or prophesying. And furthermore, the context of this instruction seems to be in public worship, so publicly in the church. It's not something that's being addressed to do when you're privately in prayer, but rather when you are, in public, so in an actual church service. And also, Paul goes on later to talk about the Lord's Supper in the same chapter and the exercising of the spiritual gifts in public worship. So it kind of ties in with that as well when you start to go on to the next couple of chapters in 12 and 13. So really, no matter what you think the head covering is referring to, it really only applies to anyone who is publicly praying or prophesying in church. Now think about it this way: if someone stood up in the church to pray or to prophesy, generally most people in the congregation would probably look to them as some sort of authority, some sort of figure of authority. And basically, we see this a lot in churches today, especially as people, exercise their spiritual gifts, the gifts that they're implementing and using within the church. And really this is the kind of thing that Paul was trying to counter by addressing this particular issue. So in order to show their submission to their husbands, really wives would cover their heads whenever they prayed or whenever they prophesied, and always when it was done publicly in the church service. Now, since I don't pray publicly in the church or prophesy publicly in the church, that is the reason why I don't wear a head covering. And, you know, even if you were to pray or to prophesy in church, I think even this particular command was something that was symbolic at the time, during this particular period of time. I think it was only specific then. I really don't believe that even if I wasn't praying or prophesying publicly in the church, I don't read this as a command that is to be taken as a universal law that everyone needs to be following, or women need to be following. I don't see it like that. I don't see that there is a need to wear a head covering every waking hour of my day. I just don't see that. I think really it was also a command at the time that was, you know, just specific for that period of time. Now, in the Bible Believers Commentary, I want to read to you what it says, because I think, you know, it's really quite interesting. And it says, "We might pause here to state that the head covering is simply an outward sign, and it is of value only when it is the outward sign of an inward grace. In other words, a woman might have a covering on her head and yet not truly be submissive to her husband. In such a case, to wear a head covering would be of no value at all. The most important thing is to be sure that the heart is truly subordinate. Then a covering on a woman's head becomes truly meaningful." So this idea of wearing a head covering, you can't just put it on because it tells you if that's what you believe. You know, your heart needs to be right as well. Your heart needs to be right before God. It's a bit like you know, women who have chosen to wear long dresses and long skirts. Now, I'm not trying to mock you at all in any way, but it's a similar thing. If you're someone who believes in modesty and that you believe that you should only wear ankle length skirts and ankle length you know, dresses because you believe that's what the Bible teaches you and you believe that is the standard for modesty for Christian women, then by all means that's fine. But if your heart is not right, if you're wearing long dresses and long skirts but you're, you know, sleeping around or doing the wrong thing, then really that outward appearance means absolutely nothing. So really just remember that everything we do, our hearts also inwardly have to be right, you know, right before God. So let's talk about the angels and why Paul has mentioned them in this particular passage. Now, I have heard some Mennonite women say that they don't know what this particular verse refers to. They don't know what it means, even though they wear the head coverings. So why don't we take a look at this verse again. And basically Paul mentions this in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 10. Now, some people seem to think that this could be an allusion of you know, where it mentions in Genesis and talks about the sons of God lusted after the daughters of men. Now, personally, I don't think this is correct. You know, Paul says nothing about lust or promiscuity being the purpose of head covering in this passage, so I don't think that really applies. And really there are plenty of women that are outside the church that angels can, you know, lust after should they want to. But really what I think this is referring to, I think Paul is mentioning the angels here because they are watching us during our worship or just watching over us in general. That's what I think it comes down to. I mean, you might have a different opinion, so I'd love to know what your thoughts are, so make sure you do leave me a comment below. Now I want to read to you from the Believer's Bible Commentary, and it says, "We would suggest that the angels are spectators of the things that are happening on earth today, as they were of the things that happened at creation. In the first creation, they saw how woman usurped the place of headship over the man. She made the decision that Adam should have made. As a result of this, sin entered the human race with its unspeakable aftermath of misery and woe. God does not want what happened in the first creation to be repeated in the new creation. When the angels look down, he wants them to see the woman acting in subjection to the man and indicating this outwardly by a covering on her head." So if you're someone who has chosen to wear a head covering, well, I think that's absolutely fine if that's your conviction. Personally, for me, I don't believe that it really teaches that we as women need to wear a head covering 24/7 or, you know, during our waking hours. If anything, only when we are praying or prophesying publicly in church, in order to show that we are in submission to our husbands. Yet at the same time, I feel like this is only something that was symbolic or put in place as a command for that specific period of time. But you may have a different opinion, and that's completely fine. I'd love to know your thoughts. Please do leave me a comment below. I love to read your comments, and you'll see me again in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.